Let me just respond to two things that I think are important for our framing going forward in the conversation, because I don't think, even though I just am now tempted to, I don't think I'll relitigate the case. I think there are two things. One is about being honest with ourselves about what this decision means going forward. And the second really is to come back to Mark's point about what's going to be the effect of it. You know, there are four things I keep in my head from South Carolina versus Katzenbach, where the Supreme Court talked about the formula that was used by Congress and why it was rational, right? So they said four things. One, they said voting suits have been onerous to prepare, protracted, and where successful, have often been followed by a shift in discriminatory devices, defiance, or evasion of court orders. One. Two, Congress, whose power to enforce the 15th Amendment has been repeatedly upheld in the past, is free to use whatever means are appropriate to carry out the objections of the objects of the Constitution. Three, Congress had reliable evidence of voting discrimination in a great majority of the areas covered by Section 4B. And finally, the court said that the focus on certain geographic jurisdictions, I quote, is rational even though it excludes certain areas where there's voting discrimination by other means. I don't think anybody thinks that those four statements in South Carolina versus Katzenbach post-Shelby can survive as an articulation that would support a formula that Congress would develop. The ground has shifted. The court has taken a more aggressive stance vis-a-vis Congress, and we have to face that going forward. Secondly, if there is one thing I would want to leave us here with today, and that I hope will frame our conversation, is to stand very much in friendly opposition to Mark's comment about redistricting, which I think Dale joined quite well, because that very often distracts us from the reality of what Section 5 actually did do. It's not only that it's going to be about polling place changes and it's going to be about voter ID, but the purpose of Section 5 in the legislative history goes to that first point I made, which was Congress's attempt to get ahead of what would come in the future. The problem is if we sit here and talk about what we're dealing with today in 2013, we'll miss the whole point. So let's suppose next year Shelby County, Alabama, or let's say the state of Alabama, or any other state decides they want to switch from electing to appointing their judges. That's a switch. We won't actually have the results of those elections, but to suggest that how judicial officers exercise their authority and who gets to select who sits on the bench will not have minute control over the lives of millions of people, and certainly over the lives of African Americans in these jurisdictions, is to kid yourself. So we have to remember that Section 5, Congress said they were enacting it to get at what they called any of the, quote, ingenious methods that might be used by jurisdictions in the future. It was forward-looking. And so we cannot satisfy ourselves by going through the list of our 2012 voter ID and early voting issues and tell ourselves that those are going to be the only matters that people like our clients will have to deal with. And the part that gives me some concern is that our inclination, because of who we are and where we sit in Washington, D.C., and New York and other places, is that we do focus on redistricting because we think a lot about national politics. But I can tell you that the lives of my clients are largely controlled at the local level by school boards and town councils and county commissions and water districts and utility districts. When I first came to the Legal Defense Fund 25 years ago, I had a case challenging justice of the peace elections. And I remember I thought justices of the peace just married people. I couldn't imagine, who cares who's the justice of the peace? But turns out they do a lot more. So I think we have to be very careful in our conversation today that we don't go towards the macro that we tend to look at when we think about politics and political participation. And we keep in mind how power is exerted over the lives of most people who live in this country, and certainly over the lives of most African Americans who live in this country, which is still principally located in the South.